Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Gathering More Leaves. I'm your host, DM DeBacker. This time, I'm trying something a little different, but first you might be wondering where I've been for the past few months. Well, over the summer, I spent a lot of time reading, researching, and taking notes. What I didn't do, however, was much writing, so no new blog post, and I'll admit by the end I was starting to get a little worried about it. But now I'm back. It's fall, though here in Las Vegas we're still riding out a heat wave. Regardless, I'm excited and I'm ready to dive back into things. And as I said, I'm switching things up a little bit this time. Recently, I stumbled upon an intriguing new tool from Google AI called NotebookLM. I first heard about it during some late night show. Specifically, I caught it while watching After Midnight, which airs after The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. What you're about to hear is an AI-generated podcast based on one of my blog posts created using NotebookLM. Curious how it works? It's pretty simple. I opened NotebookLM, created a new notebook, uploaded a source. In my case, I linked the Google Doc version of my WordPress blog, and I clicked Generate Podcast under the Audio Overview tab. I waited a few minutes and voila, an AI version of me having a conversation with an inquisitive moderator. They just don't have names just yet, but here they are. I'm planning to do more of these AI-assisted deep dives, and I can't wait for you to join me on this journey. So without further ado, here's the first of many conversations between AI me and our soon-to-be-named AI moderator. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so picture this. You're in Paris, right at the Arc de Triomphe, and you're looking at all those names of battles carved into the stone.
It's quite a sight, isn't it? A real monument to French military history.
It really is. Now, most people, they see those names and they think, wow, history. But you see Le Var, and suddenly it's not just history anymore, it's personal.
Because it's a potential link to your ancestors' past.
Exactly. Lucien François Gaume, he might have fought there, and that's where we're diving in today.
Uncovering the footsteps of a French soldier during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars.
And not just his story, but a piece of history that often gets overshadowed by the legend of Napoleon himself.
It's fascinating how certain battles capture the imagination while others fade into obscurity.
It's true. Like Le Var, I'll be honest, I had to do some Googling when I first heard that name.
It's not exactly a household name, even among military history buffs.
And that's part of what makes this deep dive so intriguing. You've got this personal connection, this mystery to unravel.
And that's often where the most compelling historical discoveries lie, when we start digging into those forgotten corners.
So let's talk about your detective work. Where did you even begin?
Well, it all started with that aha moment. Discovering the Médaille de Saint-Hilaire.
Okay, the Saint-Hilaire medal, this is more than just a family heirloom, right?
Much more. It's a medal that was awarded to surviving veterans of the Napoleonic Wars. Not by Napoleon himself, but by his nephew, Napoleon III, decades later.
So Napoleon's nephew was basically like, hey, let's honor these guys who fought in my uncle's wars, even though it was like 40 years ago.
Precisely. It was a way of recognizing the sacrifices of these veterans and solidifying the legacy of the Napoleonic era.
And for you, this medal wasn't just proof that Lucien served, it was a starting point.
Exactly. The Saint-Hilaire medal led me to a database of recipients. And there it was Lucien's name, alongside 10 other soldiers from his hometown.
Wow, so suddenly you're not just looking at a name on a medal, you're getting a glimpse into the lives of men who might have marched alongside him, trained with him, maybe even shared stories with him around a campfire.
It really brings history to life, doesn't it? When you can connect those personal stories to the larger events.
Absolutely. But you didn't stop there. You dug even deeper, using resources like Digby Smith's works on the Napoleonic Wars, which, let's be honest, are like the encyclopedias of this period.
They're invaluable resources for anyone researching this era. And through Smith's work, I uncovered a crucial detail about Lucien's unit, the 20E Demi-Brigade Infanterie Légère.
Which, as I understand it, was later reorganized into a regular regiment.
You're right. And that reorganization, that seemingly small detail, tells us a lot about the changing political and military landscape of the time.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the significance of this name change?
Well, the term demi-brigade was a product of the French Revolution.
Mm.
The revolutionaries, they wanted to break away from the old royalist traditions, and that included military terminology.
So it was like a symbolic break from the past.
Exactly. Out with the old, in with the new revolutionary army. They created these larger, more flexible units called demi-brigades.
But then Napoleon came along and he was all about bringing back tradition.
Precisely. When Napoleon rose to power, he sought to reassert order and tradition, and that included bringing back the term regiment.
Okay, so Lucien's unit, the 20E Demi-Brigade, it gets disbanded and eventually becomes the 7th Light Infantry Regiment. But here's where it gets interesting. Lucien was discharged in 1802 before that official name change happened.
Which suggests he likely enlisted right around 1792, when the revolution was in full swing and those demi-brigades were first being formed.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place, depending on how you look at it.
Imagine that a young man from the foothills of the Jura Mountains suddenly thrust into the heart of a revolution.
It's a really powerful image, and it gets even more interesting when you consider the kind of unit he might have been a part of.
You're talking about the Chasseurs du Gévaudan, the forerunners to his demi-brigade.
Right. Now, these weren't your average foot soldiers, were they?
Not at all.
Yeah.
The chasseurs à pied, or light infantry, were considered the elite, known for their speed, their marksmanship, their ability to fight in rough terrain.
So are we talking about Lucien potentially being a crack shot, dodging trees, outmaneuvering the enemy? Because that's the image I'm getting in my head.
It's a possibility. The chasseurs were often recruited from regions known for their hunters and woodsmen, skilled outdoorsmen accustomed to harsh conditions.
So they are like the special forces of their day.
That's a good way to put it. They were often deployed in advance of the main army, scouting enemy positions, skirmishing, harassing enemy lines. Real thorns in the side of their opponents.
You know when you see those paintings of Napoleon leading his army across the Alps?
Yes, iconic imagery.
Right, it's like this whole symbol of military brilliance and audacity.
The sheer scale of it, the danger, the ambition, it really captures the imagination.
Exactly. But get this, Lucien and the 20E Demi-Brigade, they crossed the Alps 3 years before Napoleon did.
3 years earlier. And in the thick of winter, no less.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a pleasant springtime stroll through the mountains here.
So while Napoleon's getting all the glory, years later, Lucien and his comrades are trudging through snow up to their knees in icy mud.
That's often the reality behind those grand narratives, isn't it? The victories, the famous campaigns, they all relied on the efforts of thousands of often unsung individuals.
So what was Lucien's part in all of this? What were they doing crossing the Alps in the middle of winter?
They were marching to reinforce Napoleon's army in Italy, which was facing some pretty stiff Austrian resistance at the time.
Okay, so this is all part of the Italian campaign then.
Precisely. And a pivotal campaign. It was Napoleon's early victories in Italy, victories like the Battle of Rivoli. They really solidified his reputation as a military genius.
Okay, so Rivoli, big battle Napoleon wins. What's the significance? I mean, why should we care about Rivoli?
Rivoli was a decisive victory for the French. It solidified their hold on northern Italy and showcased Napoleon's tactical brilliance. He outmaneuvered and defeated a larger Austrian force, securing a crucial supply line for the French army.
Wow, so Lucien was there, potentially fighting alongside Napoleon in one of his most famous victories.
It's certainly possible, and it highlights how those seemingly small stories, those individual journeys, they intersect with these much larger events, these pivotal moments in history.
It's amazing when you think about it. This one guy, Lucien, caught up in this maelstrom of war and revolution, witnessing firsthand the rise of Napoleon.
And just when you think his story is following a predictable path, you uncover something truly unexpected. The Maltese Expeditionary Force roster.
Oh, right. The roster that had me completely thrown for a loop. It's like you find Lucien's name on this list, heading towards Egypt with Napoleon.
And then poof, he vanishes.
Vanishes. What do you mean vanishes?
Well, his name appears on those early rosters for the Egyptian campaign. But it seems the 20 Demi-Brigade was redirected before ever setting sail for Egypt.
Redirected where to?
Switzerland.
Switzerland. Wait, what were they doing in Switzerland? Everyone knows Switzerland is neutral territory.
That perception of Switzerland as this haven of neutrality,
Yeah.
that's largely a product of the 19th and 20th centuries. During the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, Switzerland was very much entangled in the conflicts engulfing Europe.
Entangled how?
Well, the French had invaded Switzerland in 1798. They established what was called the Helvetic Republic, essentially a client state under French control.
A client state, so not exactly independent then.
Precisely. A client state is technically independent, but heavily influenced or controlled by a more powerful state. In this case, The Helvetic Republic was reliant on French military support and subject to French political influence.
So instead of battling mummies and sphinxes in the pyramids, Lucien might have been guarding alpine passes and navigating medieval cities in the Swiss Alps.
It's a likely scenario, and it highlights a less often discussed aspect of the Napoleonic Wars. The French weren't just fighting on multiple fronts. They were also grappling with the complexities of managing a vast and unwieldy empire.
And all the political maneuvering that came with it, it makes you realize there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Always. And in Lucien's case, the story takes another turn, because the 20E Demi-Brigade's journey doesn't end in Switzerland.
Don't tell me they sent him back to Egypt after all.
Not quite, but they were called to Italy sometime in 1799. It seems they were needed back on the Italian front.
So Switzerland, then back to Italy, all in the space of a few years. These guys really got around. What happened in Italy? Were they part of any more of Napoleon's big victories?
They were involved in several key battles, including the Battle of Novi and the Battle of Genoa, both hard-fought engagements with heavy losses on both sides.
Novi Genola, these aren't exactly names that trip off the tongue. What happened in these battles?
At Novi, the French forces faced a combined Austro-Russian army. It was a tough defeat for the French. Genoa was a smaller engagement, but strategically important. It helped secure French control of a key passage through the Apennines Mountains.
So Lucien experiences both victory and defeat. Fought in the mountains in Switzerland, probably in valleys and open fields in Italy, all while following the ebb and flow of these massive wars. It's incredible to think about.
It really puts into perspective the sheer scale and intensity of the Napoleonic Wars. These weren't isolated conflicts. They were part of a much larger struggle for power that engulfed Europe. And Lucien found himself right in the middle of it.
And all of this culminates with his discharge in 1802.
Right.
Exactly, 1802. A full decade after he first enlisted. A decade of his life dedicated to serving in the French army.
He must have been ready to hang up his boots and enjoy some peace and quiet.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But what's fascinating is that even after experiencing the tumult of war, Lucien returns home and builds a life that seems remarkably ordinary.
Ordinary.
Yeah.
How so? Well, after his military service, he goes back to his hometown, gets married, starts a family, works a variety of jobs to support them.
Like what? What kind of jobs are we talking about here?
From the records we have, he worked as a mason, then a saloon keeper, and finally a roofer. All seemingly ordinary occupations for the time.
It's quite a contrast. From seasoned soldier to mason to saloon keeper to roofer. It's like he lived multiple lives in one lifetime.
It is remarkable, isn't it? And it makes you wonder what that transition was like for him, going from the adrenaline of the battlefield to the rhythm of civilian life.
Did he ever share his war stories? Do we know?
It's intriguing to consider. Did he reminisce about his time marching across the Alps or fighting alongside Napoleon? Or did he keep those memories locked away, choosing to focus on the present and the future? Unfortunately, the historical record rarely captures those intimate details.
It makes you wonder, though, what was that like for him? Going from those intense experiences to just everyday life.
It really does.
Huh.
Did he ever think back to those days? Marching across the Alps with his comrades, or maybe finding himself in the thick of battle?
You can't help but wonder, did he ever share any of those stories?
Maybe over a drink in his saloon.
Right. Back in my day, we didn't have fancy cocktails. We drank wine in the snow after battling Austrians.
Exactly. Though I suspect those stories might have been a bit more harrowing than a casual bar tale.
Oh, absolutely. But even if he never spoke about it, you have to imagine those experiences stayed with him.
They must have shaped his worldview, his sense of self. It's hard to imagine going through something like that and not being fundamentally changed.
And in a way, those experiences become part of his legacy, right? Not just his story, but part of the story of his family.
Absolutely. It's like those echoes of the past. They reverberate through generations, even if we're not always aware of it.
And it's through those echoes, through the stories we uncover about our ancestors, that we start to see the connections between our own lives and these much larger historical narratives.
It's that realization that we're all part of this great unfolding tapestry, this continuum of human experience.
And sometimes it just takes one thread, one story, one name on a medal to start unraveling that tapestry and discovering those connections.
And in Lucien's case, you've managed to do just that. You've taken these fragmented pieces of information, these scattered records, and woven them into a compelling narrative.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. This one seemingly ordinary soldier, Lucien François Gaume, his story could have easily been lost to time.
And yet, here we are over 200 years later, piecing together his journey, uncovering those hidden chapters.
And in doing so, I think we've gained a new appreciation for the Napoleonic era, haven't we? It's not just about Napoleon and his generals anymore.
Exactly. It's about the countless individuals like Lucien, whose lives were swept up in those tumultuous events, each one with their own story to tell.
And their own mysteries to uncover. Who knows what else we might find if we keep digging?
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? There's always something more to discover, another layer to peel back, another perspective to consider.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of Lucien François Gaume, I'm left with a sense of awe at the scope of his journey and a renewed appreciation for the power of family history.
Me too. Because in the end, it's through these individual stories, these glimpses into the lives of ordinary people living through extraordinary times, that we truly connect with the past.
And maybe even gain a deeper understanding of ourselves. So to everyone listening, keep asking those questions. Keep digging into those family trees. You never know what you might find.